We are cutting the Miami Dolphins roster down to 53 guys today. It's Ben Morgan of the Fins Up Network. We're going to be, like I said, cutting this roster down. The actual team has until Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to make these cuts. And then shortly after that, we will know the 53 guys likely that we are heading into week one with against the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm going to be getting into all of my guys that I've got making that final 53. But before I do, your assignment, drop any roster predictions that you've got, fringe guys you got making it, veterans you got being released, especially anything that I don't cover. Go ahead, drop that in the comments. Curious to hear what you've got. I'm going to be throwing up a couple of graphics. One's got all the offensive guys I've got making the team. The other one's got all the defensive guys, and we'll just go position by position, giving a brief summary over everything we've got. So let's kick things off with the position of quarterback. And I've got the Dolphins keeping all three for a couple of different reasons. One of the reasons being because of that new rule that allows teams basically to keep a third quarterback active on game days. Kind of serves as an extra player. It's not counting against the guys that you can have active for that day. And the other part of this is with Mike White, I'm recording this Sunday night. So with him currently still in concussion protocol, you got to have someone behind Tua that you can trust, that knows the system, and that's obviously Skylar Thompson. I don't necessarily know if Skylar's job was completely safe prior to Mike White's concussion, but because of the fact that he's in the protocol, you almost got to keep him. But we'll talk about this a couple of times throughout the video as well. It's pay attention to the other guys that teams release. Because if there's a veteran quarterback that the Dolphins are a bit intrigued by, I wouldn't be surprised to see them. Maybe they keep a guy like Skylar right away, but then from there, maybe he is the odd man out and you bring in another team's veteran. So something to keep an eye on. But for the time being, I do have the Dolphins keeping all three of their quarterbacks. Going on to the running backs and fullbacks. Now, the game changes a little bit if Jonathan Taylor is acquired. Since he's not, like I said, as of Sunday night recording this, we're going to roll with the guys that we have. Now, the hardest thing that I had to do here was kind of wrapping my brain and my mind around the idea of keeping Jeff Wilson, who's basically been dinged up, not seeing any action throughout preseason, and not including a guy like Chris Brooks, who's been the exact opposite. He's been present. He's been good. He has been surpassing all expectations as an undrafted free agent. Now, the hope is that, yeah, Jeff Wilson can be healthy. He can contribute. And then maybe you can put a guy like Chris Brooks on your practice squad, but then you got to survive the practice squad. We've talked up a little bit about this in the past. I'm sure a lot of you already know. If you are on a team's practice squad, if you get placed on the practice squad, you then need to survive other teams potentially poaching you. Now, if you get poached, you'd have to go to that team's active roster. So the Dolphins at least have that going for them. Running backs, there's kind of a surplus in the NFL. So maybe, just maybe he would be safe there. But in regards to running back, that was one of the harder decisions that I had to make on this one. For the wide receiver, the hardest thing for me on this one was keeping a guy like Cedric Wilson. But man, that contract is just simply hard to cut. He's due what, $7 or $8 million this year. So the ideal thing would be to find a trade partner, but keeping it realistic is how realistic is a trade? How willing is another team to fork over that $7-8 million for Cedric Wilson? So that's something to consider as well. But one thing that I've been told is the idea of, because you're going to see that Robbie Chosen's name is not listed here. But like I said, one thing I've been told is the idea of releasing Robbie Chosen with the idea that creates a roster spot for like an injured quarterback. Let's just say a Jalen Ramsey and Nick Needham. And then once you keep these guys and then you put one of those guys back on PUP, on short-term IR, what have you, and then you bring a guy like Robbie Chosen back to have one of those wide receiver spots. So if he's released right away, keep that in the back of your mind that might be the reason why they actually released him, with intentions potentially of bringing him back. And then one other thing is River Craycraft's name's not listed. My hope would be that he could survive on the practice squad like he did last year. Man, he was brought into some games early in the year. He was catching everything thrown his way. He scored touchdowns in back-to-back games. That would be my theory and my idea with a guy like River Craycraft. Moving on to tight end, man, one of the tougher positions we've just discussed the entire offseason. I kept Swibert, Eric Swibert, kept him kind of just due to that blocking, that veteran experience that he would have outside of Durham Smythe because the rest of our options don't necessarily have that. Issue is he's hurt. So that's something to keep an eye on. I got Elijah Higgins surviving just kind of simply due to draft capital because guys like Tanner Connor and Julian Hill, and then if you would throw Elijah Higgins in that mix, well, which one of those guys is more likely to get poached by another team if you put him on the practice squad? Well, it's probably Higgins, maybe just due to draft capital alone, him being a former 6th-round pick, whereas the other guys weren't drafted, and Tanner Connor was a wide receiver, tight end, converted player. So watch for those guys potentially on the practice squad. Also potentially watch for, like I said before, who's getting released at the tight end position, or kind of thinking outside of the box, maybe a low-key trade, maybe a team wants to try to get something for a veteran tight end at some point in time, and the Dolphins say, hey, man, we are thin at tight end. It's one of our weaker overall positions on the entire team. Maybe we need one of these veterans. So keep your eye out for that as well. Let's wrap things up here with the offensive line. The first guys that I have listed are kind of my assumed starting offensive line. And then from there, I've got Kendall Lamb because he's our best option at left tackle. If Teron Armstead is indeed not ready for the start of the season, or God forbid, if something were to happen, you know that you can count at least on Kendall Lamb at some capacity due to the progress that he has shown this offseason. With Robert Jones, this one was a little tough, right, for me because he's injured, but I have him making it due to the potential of him getting poached. Offensive linemen are kind of like the opposite of running back. If you release an offensive lineman that has even a little bit of promise, you are risking it if you try to put him on the practice squad. So just for that reason alone, I have him keeping it as well. Liam Eichenberg, man, another super tough one. I'm putting him on this roster just kind of due to his draft capital alone, and then also the front office has kind of shown they don't want to admit failure on one of their draft picks, especially a high draft pick. And with him being a former 2nd-rounder, man, that would not look good if you cut him. And then I like Dan Feeney to make it. He's got that versatility. On Saturday night, he played both center and guard. And then if you look at guys that I think have a shot at the practice squad, I'm looking at Uluave and I'm looking at Lester Cotton. So that is where I'm at in regards to the offensive side of the ball. Let's flip up the defensive side here. We'll start with the interior defensive lineman. We're keeping the big three: Wilkins, Sealer, Davis. Sealer obviously just got the deal. I'm recording this Sunday night. We'll see what continues to happen with the other two. And then I've got Brandon Peely being the other guy, kind of having the edge over a Deshaun Hand, a Jalen Twyman, Jamal Woods, who was just brought in. But what I'm thinking with those other guys that aren't listed that I just named off is hopefully the practice squad for at least one of these guys. I would like another veteran presence if something were to happen to one of the big three guys, we'll call them, rather than putting all that weight on Brandon Peely's shoulders. But Emmanuel Ogba has been playing a little bit inside. You'll see I have him making it there as an edge rusher. But regardless, would like to continue to invest in a guy like Jalen Twyman if you can. Linebackers, the first couple are a bit obvious there, but then I've got Andrew Van Ginkel, kind of that newfound versatility, being able to line up linebacker, on ball, off ball. I like what they're doing with him there. Channing Tindall was honestly one of my harder decisions. However, if you put him on the practice squad, I'm not quite sure he survives that as a 3rd-round pick just last year, 2 years ago, whatever it was. But then the notables that you're leaving off, kind of the fan favorite from the undrafted free agents, which was Aubrey Miller. He didn't get drafted, so there's that. So maybe he doesn't get poached from the practice squad. He didn't blow up this offseason, so there's not a ton of tape out there. So maybe he survives a practice squad. Keep in mind the Dolphins gave him some decent coin as a UDFA. So he's one I left off. And then AJ Johnson, who the Dolphins just brought in as well, been injured the last couple of years, but obviously they brought him on for a reason. He's been in Fangio's system before. Maybe there's something there. Potentially you can continue to invest on him and your practice squad as well. I had to check one thing and I'll throw the graphic back up. All right, let's move on to the edge. We talked about Emmanuel Ogba already there, but I gave Agude the nod over guys like Malik Reed and Garrett Nelson and Cameron Good, simply because I think with a guy like Agude, you're getting some financial savings, Plus, he's shown that potential, whether it's been in some games, he's had some good moments throughout OTAs, minicamp, training camp. He's actually gotten his name called, in my opinion, more than a guy like Malik Reed. And I'm not saying Malik Reed's a bad guy, and not that I don't want him on this roster, just hasn't really seen the overall impact that I really thought he might be able to provide once we signed him. But once again, that practice squad, it comes into play here. A guy like Garrett Nelson, the Cameron Good, the Mitchell Agude, if he's not going to make it. These are some guys that I think you continue to invest in. Garrett Nelson has flashed multiple times. Cameron Good survived on it last year. Like I said, if Mitchell Agude doesn't make the actual 53, you got to think he's one of those last guys that are competing for one of those final roster spots. So him on the practice squad if he doesn't make it. Cornerbacks and safeties left. Let's start with the cornerbacks. Like I said, we got to count Jalen Ramsey and Nick Needham on the 53. And then, like I said, we can add others from there if they move them to the PUP short-term IR. But due to those injuries, man, I've got how many guys there? 6, 7 guys probably. I wouldn't be surprised if we keep another guy just because of those injuries. Ramsey, we're obviously not going to see till what? November at the earliest. Nick Needham still on the PUP. We're not going to be able to count on either of those guys. So keeping a couple of other guys in mind, Bryce Thompson, Perry Nickerson, those are a couple of guys to potentially keep an eye on in this situation. And then I know the name that sticks out. It's Iggy for the 4th consecutive year, rostering Noah Igbenogany. But like I said, due to his contract, due to these injuries, got to keep someone. We absolutely have to keep someone. So maybe he gets the nod just because of his experience with the team. And he did flash a little bit here and there in training camp. It didn't necessarily translate over to the games. But at the end of the day, we got to keep someone. And that contract may make him a little bit harder to release at this point. I got to pick that down. I'm going to bring it right back up here as we wrap up on the safeties. So the safeties, Brandon Jones, another guy that could be kind of one of those candidates for PUP, short-term IR. He got very, very limited reps this offseason. I know everyone was happy when he wasn't just strictly placed on the PUP, but man, how many game reps, or no game reps, but how many team reps did he get in practice? Very, very little. And then a guy like Elijah Campbell, who was injured Saturday night. We'll see how that impacts him and who else we potentially keep at safety. And then I kept a guy like Trill Williams. A couple of reasons here. The potential that he has, man, before that injury last year, the dude was looking awesome in the secondary. I know Vic Fangio loves his versatility, just his sheer physique, the size that he has, his ability to play both cornerback and safety, especially if we're already looking at injuries at both of those positions. I kept him, and the guys that got left off were the likes of Verone McKinley, Keydron Smith, guys that I like. I really like Verone McKinley, and obviously he was able to get elevated from the practice squad last year. But I look at those guys as potential practice squad guys again for this year as well. So keep your eye on there. And then not listed are the specialty guys. We've got guys like Jason Sanders, Jake Bailey, Blake Ferguson. So those are the guys that'll round out the 53-man roster on here. But those are my 53 Dolphins fans. If you count them all up, there are 53 there. Like I said, go ahead, drop your roster predictions, thoughts, comments, anything you've got in the comment section. That's what it's there for. Be back with the next video discussing that initial 53-man roster once it is finalized. Man, that was a lot. Mouth's already dry. I'm going to have to go upstairs and finish grilling and get me one of those beers. Until next time, Dolphins fans, fins up.